And I would like to introduce our guest speaker this morning, Dr. Rosie Shrout. And the presentation for October's webinar here is how we catch our partner's stress and how it affects our relationships and health. So to introduce Dr. Shrout, she joined Purdue University's Human Development and Families Studies Department this fall semester as an assistant professor. She earned her PhD in interdisciplinary social psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno, and completed presidential postdoctorate fellowship in the Ohio State University's Institute for Behavioral Medicine Research. Dr. Shrout studies how couple stress affects their relationships and health. She focuses on the underlying psychological, behavioral, and biological pathways connecting stress to people's own and their parents' relational and physical health across adulthood and later life. Dr. Shrout's research addresses why some couples grow stronger and healthier through hardship, while others experience relationship conflict and health problems. Her goal is to identify factors that put couples' relationships and health at risk, and to inform interventions on how couples can grow closer and stronger during turbulent times, which is what we're definitely living through right now. Dr. Shrout has received several grants, fellowships, and rewards. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Rosie Shrout as she presents today's webinar titled, How We Catch Our Partner's Stress and How It Affects Our Relationships and Health. And I'll turn it over to you, Rosie.
All right, well, thank you for that incredibly warm welcome. I'm really happy to be here with you all. So I just shared my screen. Does everyone see the PowerPoint? I want to make sure it looks good. Okay, great. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today and talk about how our relationships affect how stress affects our relationships and health. And I also just want to say that the subject email for this talk with the little like emoji with the heart eyes, it was just like too much for me. It was amazing and really, really cute. So just made my day to see that email have that. But so I just want to get started by asking you all a question. So have you ever been so stressed that you could feel it in your body? Maybe your palms were sweaty, your heart was racing, or you could feel your blood pressure rising. Yes, I'm seeing some yeses. But then your partner hugged you or even held your sweaty hand, and it felt like a giant weight was lifted off your shoulders. I know I have. We might not realize it, but our partners affect our stress and our health. And in fact, people who are married live longer, healthier lives than those who are unmarried, divorced, and widowed. And this might not seem like a big deal, but when you consider that marriage's health impact is similar to, if not greater than how much we eat, drink, exercise, and smoke, we realize that our relationships can influence how healthy we age, either adding years to or taking years off our lives. Now, you might be thinking that you should run down to City Hall and get married so that you'll reap marriage's health benefits. But unfortunately, it's not that simple, because it's not just the act of walking down the aisle and signing a marriage license that improves health. It's what spouses do for each other and the support they provide each other when they're stressed. So today I'll talk about the different ways partners manage stress with the goal of answering two overarching questions. How is my partner so good at taking that giant weight off my shoulders? And how does taking that giant weight off my shoulders reduce my own and my partner's risks for morbidity and mortality? I see there's some comments, and okay, I think they're just making sure everyone's good. Okay, I just wanted to keep an eye on the chat. I saw there were lots of comments, but they were just checking in. So anyways, so for today's presentation, I'll first talk about why stress is so important, and then I'll talk about how stress affects our bodies. And then I'll talk about some of the research on stress in couples, and lastly, what couples can do to manage stress. So first, why is stress so important? Well, roughly 60% of the problems brought to physicians in the US are stress related. And many health concerns are the result of stress, while others are worse or last longer because of stress. Some common stress-related health problems that maybe even some of our own partners have experienced include headaches, fatigue, anxiety, digestive problems, insomnia, and there's really so many more health concerns that so many people experience. And there are many major and minor life events that are stressors, and this past year really threw a lot at us and our families. So I want right now for all of us to take a few minutes here and to think back over the last year and write down the points listed for each of the events that you experienced during this last year. So take your time, write down the number that for the event that you experienced, and then add them all up at the end. And make sure to write down your total number because I will have everyone put their total score into a Zoom poll. So go ahead and take a few minutes here to add up all of these different life events, and I'm going to get that poll going.
Will you say where this list was, where it came from, these items?
Yeah, so this is just a teaching tool. This is not a validated measure that I would use in research. So this just came from a textbook that I use when I'm teaching a personal health and wellness class.
Oh, awesome. I like it. I mean, it's really comprehensive.
Yeah, it is a very comprehensive list. So I'm not seeing the option to do a Zoom poll. I don't know why not. Zoom doesn't like me today, that's fine. So I'm not seeing the option to even do a poll, so I'm really sorry. So for people who feel comfortable, I know it's not anonymous, if you wouldn't mind putting your score in the chat and I can take a look at it. It's okay if you don't feel comfortable. I wish I had the poll, it's not working, but once you've added all of those up, if you wouldn't mind just putting a number in the chat so we could all get an idea of everyone's scores. Thank you. All right, so I see some people 424, 300, 386, 150, 199, 214. Yeah, so what I would typically have is a range from 0 to 250, 250 to 500, and 500 plus. And so what I'm seeing here is not too many people are hitting that 500 plus threshold. So most people are between 250 and 500. That's the typical average score for this list. And depending on what happened within that last year, the scores can definitely change. So for example, my score was well over 500. I got a new job, I applied for jobs, I moved to a different state. There was just a lot of things that happened in my last year that could lead to higher stress. And as you fill this out, you might have noticed that some of the events were actually positive events, like getting married or having a baby. And some of us might have experienced a lot of different stressors, but that doesn't mean that we're all stressed the same or stressed any differently. So just because you have a high score doesn't necessarily mean you feel stressed. But just because you have a low score doesn't mean that you don't feel stressed. And so that's all to say that the stress experience is very subjective. Two people can experience the same stressor and report very different stress levels. So what can lead to these different stress responses? Well, so my colleagues and I recently published a model to understand what makes stress worse and what can help alleviate stress. So we illustrated how a stressor can affect the body across time, ranging from seconds to years. So don't worry, we're only going over a few key parts of this model to help us understand how stress works within couples. So first, the model illustrates factors that can heighten or dampen the stress response. And my work focuses on those dyadic level factors, such as how hostile and how negative partners can make stress work and prolong the stress response, while supportive and positive partners can reduce stress and its health consequences. And these dyadic factors illustrate how our partners can either add to those weights or help take them off our shoulders. And today I'll talk about a few stress responses that affect our health, including cortisol, inflammation, heart rate variability, and accelerated aging. Since our strong and satisfying relationships help us live longer and healthier lives, it's also important to understand how that happens. How does the way we interact and communicate with our partners affect how long and healthy we live? A key question that I usually ask in my research is, why do some couples become closer and healthier through hardship, while others experience relationship and health problems? And taking it one step further, how does the way I navigate hardship and stress affect my partner's health? And how does the way my partner navigates hardship and stress affect my health? And because stress is inevitable and a natural part of relationships, I wanted to connect these dots and provide a roadmap to understand how partners influence their own and their partner's morbidity and mortality risks through emotional, psychological, behavioral, and biological pathways. And so I recently expanded on our model to build in that dyadic piece and show how partners affect each other's health, particularly in times of stress. And this is called the Diatic BioBehavioral Stress Model. So to provide a very brief illustration, this model shows that when experiencing a stressor like conflict, it can alter couples' relationship processes, such as the way they see stress and if they talk about stress. These relationship processes can then contribute to both partners' relationship outcomes, like their relationship quality, their satisfaction, and their stability. And in turn, these relationship outcomes can alter both partners' biobehavioral mechanisms, including their emotional, psychological, behavioral, and biological health. And these can ultimately promote or impair their physical health outcomes, like disease development, illness severity, and accelerated aging. This model also addresses how risk and protective factors across socio-demographic and relational contexts alter paths throughout the model by taking a developmental contextual approach. So for example, it can examine how both partners' age, race, and gender strengthen or weaken how our own stress and health influence our partner's stress and health. And today I'll talk about a few projects that inspired and helped develop this model. So I have another question for you all. You can feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. When you get stressed, how do you feel? Feel free to take yourself off mute or just put in the chat about how you feel when you're stressed. Easily irritated. Yes, absolutely on edge.
Frustrated.
Frustrated, exactly. Very short with everyone, overwhelmed, unable to focus. Yes. So there's a lot of different feelings, whether it's something like you're irritated or you're feeling like you don't have the bandwidth. And yes, exhausted, apathetic. And then you can also think about how your body might feel. You might feel anxious, you might have your heart race, you might start to get a little bit sweaty. And that's because stress affects how we feel cognitively, and as well as how our bodies feel. And so when we experience stress, there's also that physiological piece of stress. And these might include symptoms like having saliva decrease. And so you might have dry mouth, you might have your heartbeat faster and harder, your pupils will dilate, your adrenal glands might release important stress hormones like cortisol, and you may start to sweat. And each of these biological functions is necessary to respond to a sudden and acute stressor. And then when that stressor is gone, the body returns to normal. So I want to give a quick primer on what happens to our bodies when they don't quite return to normal. This is a relatively simplistic description, but when we experience stress, there's multiple hormones released from the brain. And one of the most well-known stress hormones is cortisol, which helps to fuel that body's fight or flight response. And cortisol does really important things at the biological level, like blocking growth and reproduction of inflammatory immune cells, which do things like help improve our memory and regulate our sleep. This makes sense evolutionarily because the body's stress response provides those resources to deal with a sudden acute stressor. But today's stressors tend to be chronic and ongoing, and our bodies can't always produce such a big stress response. So for those who really relate to this and consider themselves to be 3% human and 97% stress, their bodies can't keep up and they start developing dysregulated cortisol patterns. And another key part of the body's stress response that can be affected by chronic stress is heart rate variability, or HRV. So HRV represents the variation in time between each heartbeat. And higher HRV is generally good because it indicates greater cardiac flexibility, and that our body's fight or flight and rest and digest systems are balanced. But chronic stress can interfere with our body's ability to keep these systems balanced, leading to low HRV levels. And so as stress increases, HRV decreases. We can think about it a little bit like this. So someone who has a resting heart rate of 70 and then experiences increases in their heart rate during exercise or a virtual talk, and then experiences decreases in their heart rate during rest, would have much more variability in their heart rate, meaning their cardiovascular system is able to adapt to each situation. But someone who has a heart rate of 95 all the time, regardless of whether they're resting, exercising, or giving a talk, would have very little variability in their heart rate, meaning their cardiovascular system is not adapting to each situation. And these chronic stress responses, such as high cortisol and low HRV, affect multiple regulatory systems, including the immune system and inflammatory immune cells, which can lead to higher levels of inflammation. And why is inflammation important? Well, acute or good inflammation is often a direct result of tissue damage or injury. It's both adaptive and necessary. When we get injured, inflammation helps us heal. And once that acute injury or infection has resolved, inflammation should reduce and our bodies go back to normal. But sometimes our bodies can have problems shutting off its inflammatory response, leading to chronic or bad inflammation. And there are a lot of reasons why we have bad inflammation, including what we eat, how often we drink, how stressed we feel. And inflammation poses a threat to long-term health when the body doesn't turn off its inflammatory response and starts attacking healthy tissue. So essentially, the body can't turn off its inflammatory light switch. And our body's heightened inflammatory responses and weakened immune system can leave us vulnerable to psychological and physical illness. So for example, when you're stressed, we're more likely to experience poor psychological health, like negative mood and anxiety. and engage in poor health behaviors like drinking, smoking, reduced physical activity, and having trouble sleeping. And together, our body's stress response, along with poor psychological health and health behaviors, can lead to physical health problems and illness, like colds, infections, flare-ups of chronic conditions, and digestive problems. In fact, inflammation underlies 9 out of the top 10 leading causes of death in the US. So as shown in this graph, the darker, thicker bars represent associations between inflammation and the cause of death, and the lighter, thinner bars represent direct or indirect associations between inflammation and the cause of death. And these associations become even stronger as we grow older because age-related immune system weakening can heighten inflammatory responses. And this physiological cascade can lead to changes in health status and biological aging, suggesting that inflammation is an important marker underlying morbidity and mortality. So Sheldon Cohen spent years trying to understand why some people get sick when they're stressed and others rarely get a sniffle. So in one of his most famous papers, he tested experimentally who would be more likely to get a cold based on their stress levels and the type of stress they experienced. So Cohen and his colleagues exposed people to the cold virus and then looked at who actually got sick. So yes, you heard me right. He literally exposed people to the cold virus and had them stay in hotels to see who got sick. And as you can see in this graph, the green bar shows that people who reported higher stress levels were more likely to develop a cold compared to those in the blue bar for people with lower stress. In fact, more than half the people who were highly stressed developed a cold. He also looked at what was different in these groups and specifically what types of stress they were experiencing. And he found that people with more stress were those who were unemployed and people who were experiencing conflict with family or friends. In another seminal study, Jan Kiekel-Glaser took this one step further and looked at how marital stress can affect our health. She and her colleagues had couples come into the lab and they gave them small and non-invasive punch biopsy wounds. And so, yes, she literally gave each person a tiny wound. And then to top things off, all couples spent 20 minutes trying to solve one of their biggest marital disagreements. She and her colleagues then followed up with the couples for a couple weeks to see how their wounds healed. She found that couples who were more hostile during the discussions had wounds that healed more slowly than the couples whose interactions were less hostile. In fact, the couples who were high in hostility healed at only 60% of the rate of the low hostile couples. This was a groundbreaking study because it showed that the quality of our relationships and the way we talk to our partners affect our immune functioning, increasing the risk for a variety of health problems over time. In my work and collaborations with Jan Kiekel-Glaser, we looked at those same couples to see how their typical communication patterns were associated with their inflammation before they received that punch biopsy wound. This way we could see how the way they typically talk was linked to their inflammation. And we focused on a specific negative communication pattern, the demand withdraw pattern, which happens when one partner tries to talk about something and the other partner avoids the issue completely or ends the conversation. We can see that when husbands reported low levels of demand withdraw behavior, they and their spouses had similarly low levels of inflammation. But when husbands reported high levels of demand withdraw behavior, their own inflammation levels remained unchanged, but their wife's inflammation increased. So husbands' self-reported demand withdraw behaviors were important for their wife's inflammation, but not their own. These results suggest that wives had higher inflammation when their husbands typically demanded and withdrew during important conversations. And these have important implications because although this is a negative communication pattern, many couples do this and they demand and withdraw in everyday life. And doing so regularly may wear on each partner's and particularly wives' health. In another study, we looked at what happens to each partner's cortisol response on a day they experienced conflict. So cortisol is typically highest after waking and then declines across the day, but stress can lead to elevated levels and slower declines. Drawing on dyadic stress theories that suggest partners can affect each other's health, we wondered, can a partner's stress elevate a person's own cortisol on a day they experience conflict, posing risks to their long-term health? We tested this research question by looking at both spouses' perceived stress and cortisol levels on a day they had conflict. So married couples engaged in a 20-minute discussion about one of their biggest disagreements, and then they provided 5 salivary cortisol samples across the day. And to facilitate this discussion, we used questionnaires that each person completed about how much they agree or disagree with a variety of topics. And then we spent about 15 minutes with each couple to identify the topic that was the most contentious. So essentially, we pried just enough until we thought to ourselves, oh, this topic hits a nerve. So this picture shows the husband listing off his concerns one by one, while the wife raised her hand so that she could speak. For the couple on the right, both partners were smiling and their legs were typically close or touching the entire conversation. And so you can see that this conversation looks very different for different couples. And so once we identified that topic, we let them talk by themselves for 20 minutes. We then coded their conflict behaviors, and these included negative behaviors like criticizing each other, rolling their eyes, and using a hostile tone of voice, as well as positive behaviors like holding each other's hands, sharing thoughts and feelings, and working together to problem solve. So first, when looking at how a person's own and their partner's stress was related to cortisol, we found that a partner's stress, rather than a person's own stress, altered how quickly their cortisol levels declined that day. First, we see that individuals with less stressed partners had steep and thus healthy cortisol declines. But those with stressed partners had slower, less healthy cortisol declines that day. We can also see at the beginning of the day, there were no differences in their cortisol levels, but differences emerged after the conflict, with spouses with stressed partners having higher conflict than those with less stressed partners, even 4 hours after the couple's conflict. These results suggest that when people's partners felt stressed, their own cortisol declined at a slower rate across the day compared to people whose partners felt less stressed. We also found that the combination of a stressed spouse plus the couple's negative conflict and behaviors and lack of positive behaviors were associated with a person's own higher average cortisol that day. So spouses' average cortisol was higher when they argued with an already stressed partner and used more negative and fewer positive behaviors during conflict. This study suggests that a partner's stress can elevate a person's own cortisol levels during conflict and even 4 hours after the conflict, revealing a potential biological pathway between conflict and physical health. So this finding was expected, but it's one of those findings that really just sticks with me because we all might be able to think of a time when we argued with a stressed partner, and these results suggest that our own cortisol could have been elevated even 4 hours later. And this finding has important implications because people tend to argue when stress is already running high. And the combination of high partner stress plus negative conflict behaviors can have biological consequences for our own health. In an ongoing paper, we're looking at middle-aged and older couples and their specific communication patterns and how they relate to HRV during conflict. Theories such as Carson's socio-emotional selectivity theory say as we grow older, our intimate relationships become even more important. And so relationship dynamics might be even more important and have stronger effects on health. HRV is particularly important among older adults because it generally decreases as we age, posing additional age-related health consequences. And although older couples tend to be more reactive to stress, they also use more positive behaviors during conflict, and they're more likely to identify as a couple or a team rather than 2 separate individuals. A couple's shared identity is often shown in the way that they talk. So for example, using terms like we, rather than you and me is referred to we talk. For example, saying we got this rather than you and I got this shows that spouses are thinking about how they as a couple will get through something together as a team. I wondered whether older couples we talk could help reduce conflict's biological toll and if the health benefits were greatest when spouses talked in relational terms. To address this question, middle-aged and older couples engaged in a 20-minute conflict discussion while wearing heart rate monitors to assess heart rate variability. We used the same conflict procedure as the last study, and then we transcribed their discussion to measure we talk, or the proportion of words using first-person plural pronouns, such as we, us, and our. So as shown by this gold line, when both spouses used we talk more often, their HRV was higher and thus healthier. We could also see that their HRV fluctuated, indicating greater cardiac flexibility, which is better for overall cardiovascular health. In contrast, we see in this black line that when both partners used we talk less often, their HRV was lower and thus less healthy. We could also see that their HRV was pretty flat with a decline at the end, signaling greater cardiovascular risk. Then the spouses who had different levels of we talk, we can see their HRV fell in the middle of spouses who used we talk either more or less often. So even when only one person used we talk, both spouses experienced a health advantage. These results suggest that talking in relational terms, or we talk, help to reduce conflict's biological toll among middle-aged and older couples, particularly when both spouses use we talk more often. I know the term we talk sounds a little bit cheesy, but next time you're watching TV or a movie or even talking with your partner, listen for those keywords, we, us, and our. These communication patterns are not just important for creating that couple identity, but they're also important for each partner's health. So this research shows how different aspects of marital conflict, including the way we communicate, can get under our skin across adulthood to either increase or decrease morbidity and mortality risks for ourselves and for our partners. So today I talked about a few ways partners can help take that giant weight off, including using positive conflict behaviors, focusing on a couple level identity, and working as a team to manage stress. And these can help couples' relationships stay strong and improve both partners' physical and psychological health. So these findings demonstrate the importance of looking at stress from a couple or dyadic level lens. This dyadic view of stress is helpful to help us understand how stress perceptions and coping ultimately affect each person's health, as well as the couple's health and well-being. And this is particularly useful for prevention and intervention because it allows us to go beyond those individual-oriented interventions and methods and integrate the role of the partner and how they might shape how each other see stress and react to stress. It also shows how each partner can mutually assist one another in the coping process, like providing support, talking things through together, or seeing something that can be navigated as a team. It also shows that professionals can draw on and enhance dyadic coping resources, in addition to individual level coping skills, like identifying ways for partners to completely take over certain tasks for one another or help each other see stress in a different light. These dyadic level programs are really important in helping couples navigate stress in everyday life, as well as those major life events. So what can we do to manage stress together? Well, partners influence each other's health behaviors like their sleep, exercise, diet, substance use, and healthcare utilization, each of which is tied to disease development, longevity, and quality of life. And couples' health behaviors become more similar over time, altering health risks as people age. For example, middle-aged and older couples are more likely to exercise, smoke less, and lose weight if their partners do the same. Many people turn to things that aren't really helpful and instead can make stress worse. And these things include like drinking, smoking, using drugs, eating high saturated fat foods. In fact, 26% of adults in the US binge drink and 25% use food as a coping mechanism. So I know most of the things I just mentioned are so many people's go-to coping strategies, but unfortunately, they can make stress worse and exacerbate our stress. But there are things we can do to help reduce stress, and they can be really fun to do with our partners. So to deal with stress, partners can listen to and validate each other. They can create a strong couple identity by using words like we, us, and our when talking to and about each other. They can show that they understand where each other are coming from during conflict, and they can make time to connect and do things they love together. Having a date night once a week can improve the couple's relationships and communications over time. And of course, there's things like exercising, eating well, developing healthy sleeping habits together that can improve mood and reduce people's stress. There's also great self-care and self-soothe behaviors like yoga, meditation, and positive affirmations. And partners can do these behaviors by themselves or together as a couple. And research shows that doing these things together and with someone who's experiencing the same stressor can be even more beneficial. And so when you take care of yourself, it helps your partner. And when your partner takes care of themselves, it also helps you. So one thing that I want each of us to do right now to help reduce the stress that I just caused by talking about stress for half an hour is I want each of us to privately write down 3 things that we're grateful for. So take a moment here, write down 3 things that you are grateful for today, and I'm going to do the same thing. All right, so thank you all for taking a moment to relax with me, and thank you for your time this morning. I would be happy to hear your thoughts and take any questions.
Rosie, I didn't see any questions in the chat box, but for all the participants, you're welcome to put the questions in the chat box, or we're a fairly small group. If you want to just unmute and ask the question, that would be okay. I've also put in a few times the URL for our program evaluation. So at the end, if you would please take a moment and fill out that evaluation, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. I was going to ask that one study about the husband's demanding behaviors and withdrawing. Was that just husbands, or did you research if the wives affected the husbands too?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, that's a great question. We did look at it both ways, and it wasn't the wives' reported demand withdrawal behaviors were not significant for either person. So there really was that something specific about the husband's demand withdrawal that was important for the wives' inflammation.
Interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for asking that question. I had made a note about that too. I was wondering if it was a 2-way relationship. And I know I have to have another biopsy in a few weeks. So I'm going to tell my husband he has to be nice to me so my wound will heal faster.
Yeah, it is true. These and it's to be someone who does this kind of research and then try to have a healthy relationship. I'm like, oh, what would my research say to do? And it takes it's like, okay, well, I can't be too, I can't do too much, because then my partner will be like, okay, now you're using research on me. But it's important.
Well, and for a lot of the things that you mentioned today, Rosie, here in Indiana, we have a program called Elevate, taking your relationship to the next level. So a lot of the things that you mentioned here at the end of what we can do is covered in that program. So educators that in Indiana, we've got several of you on today that this would be a great program to deliver. And you can see now more about the research behind that program. It's great. It's a great fit to hear this research and help understand that curriculum a little bit more and the things that we're teaching, such as about the cortisol levels. And we do some mindfulness activities in that curriculum to help reduce stress, because we measure our heart rates in there also. Any other questions?
I just have a quick comment. I'm not sure if it's a question, Rosie. I really enjoyed this information. We teach in Missouri here, and we've got several Missouri folks on as well. We teach a program called Taking Care of You, which is mindfulness based, but that's not actually the one I was thinking about. We also teach a co-parenting class focused on kids, and it's for divorced, separated, it's co-parenting in separate households. And I'm just curious, I feel like there are bits and pieces of this presentation that could apply to those situations, because always what we're talking about in that course is how do you work together with that other partner. And so I just find that really interesting. I kept trying to formulate a question in the chat. It's not necessarily a question. I just think that research is interesting to look at it from a stress perspective. So thank you for, and if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them on the kind of, if you're in a relationship, but you're not in a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting connection. And, you know, my work certainly is focused on couples who are together, but I mean, these communication patterns are important across relationships. So even friends, like talking to your friend, validating them, listening to them, creating that identity, like that is still important for those relationships. And so I could imagine for couples who are, or for people who are co-parenting but not together anymore, having those really positive communication patterns and behaviors will be beneficial for them to be able to get through things together and to co-parent more effectively, and also for the child to learn and to observe and to see their parents doing those things, even though they're not together anymore. So seeing your parent validate and show concern, and, you know, think about it as, because there's still a unit, there's still a team. So still thinking about that, I think would be really important. I've done no work on it. I have not read on it, but I think it would be a really interesting thing to look at.
Great comment, Amy, because I was thinking about the same thing. Here in Indiana, we have a program for divorcing parents, and we talk in there about transition times. And if it's stressful for the kids, it takes 72 hours for their cortisol and hormone levels to go down. So, you know, it may be 48 hours and they go through the transition back to the other parent, and now that clock kind of starts all over again of them just feeling this constant stress, you know, constant stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's some really cool research too. I mean, looking at couples and having a child in the room and doing some conflict behaviors and interactions and recording that, looking at both the parent and child stress responses. And so I think there's, I mean, to look at it within the family system is really important. And I think could have implications no matter what the family looks like.
Any other questions for Dr. Shrout?
If you end up having questions, always feel free. My email is here. I'll put it in the chat, shrout@Purdue. Oh, definitely forgot the U. There you go. Feel free to reach out, message me. I love being connected to Extension. My advisor in grad school, he was full-time extension and just kind of mentored grad students for fun is what he would say. So yeah, I always love connecting and chatting with people, and especially with the couple level interventions. I just would be really passionate about, moving in that direction.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosie, for today's very informative presentation and providing us a lot of research on relationships and how it affects our health and our spouses or significant others' health also. So we really enjoyed you sharing this and appreciate from the whole group at North Central Region Aging Network your willingness to share your time and talent with us and knowledge with us
Thank
today.
you. Yeah, thank you all for having me. It was so great to be here.
Thank you. Join us each month on the first Friday of each month to participate in our North Central Region Aging Network webinars. We provide a webinar similar to this the first Friday of each month. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next month.